You've probably heard the government is planning to break the link between gas and electricity prices. Sounds great. Cheaper bills, right? Well, not so fast, because the reality is this isn't the silver bullet that most people think it is. So what's been announced? Well, the government have said they're going to start looking at ways via the Department of Energy and Net Zero and through what is known as REMA consultations to reduce the impact that gas has on setting electricity prices. To do this, they're going to move older renewable contracts onto fixed price contracts and potentially redesign the whole market. But here's the key point. They've not actually committed to do anything yet. So what does breaking the link actually mean? Well, right now, gas power stations set the price for electricity for the vast majority of the day. Even if we have plenty of cheap wind and solar, you still pay the price that gas charges to generate electricity, because as the most expensive source of generation, they're the ones that set the price. The government is proposing to move a lot of the older renewables that are in the market onto fixed price contracts, and also to reduce the influence that gas has on the price. But what they're talking about here is a minor evolution of the market that we have today, not a revolution. Before we dive into what they're proposing to do, let's talk about how they're proposing to figure out what needs to be done. This is going to be done through something called REMA. REMA is the Review of the Electricity Market Arrangements. This is a long-running consultation designed to hear from energy companies, generators, grid operators, and even the general public, bringing together input across the entire industry. It asks how electricity should be priced, whether prices should vary by location, how to reward for things like batteries and grid flexibility. But in reality, although you can contribute your voice to this is really the industry's way of telling government how they want the market set up. This is not a decision, it's a process, and it's an ongoing process that has been in place for a number of years. So why is the system broken? Well, the current system was built quite a long time ago when we were ostensibly a fossil fuel run country. We had predictable generation because coal-fired power stations, when you start them up, they run continually so long as you feed them coal. But now we live in an era of cheap renewables with some expensive gas. Now, let's talk about how the pricing of that energy actually happens. Every 30 minutes, there is an auction. Generators bid into the market saying how much electricity they can produce and at what price. The grid then stacks those bids from cheapest to most expensive and takes what it needs to meet current demands. Wind and solar generally bid very low because their cost of generation is so much lower. Gas plants bid higher because not only do they have the cost of running the plant, they also have to continually feed the plant with new fuel. Now here's the key part. The most expensive generator in that 30-minute window sets the price for everyone. And that generator is most often than not gas. Let me give you a really simple example. In a given 30-minute period, imagine that the grid has a certain level of demand. 95% of that demand can be met by cheap renewables, wind and solar. 5%, the last 5% of that demand comes from gas power stations. That last 5% is needed because we need to keep the lights on. The grid can't operate on 95% of the power that it needs 100%. Therefore, gas power plants get switched on, and the price for all of that energy, including the 95% that comes from cheap renewables, is set at the price of gas. That means 100% of the electricity in that 30-minute period is priced at the gas rate. So what happens? Cheap electricity gets priced like expensive electricity. Now, I'm sure everyone at this point is saying, well, the wind and the solar generators must be making out like bandits. Well, that's not strictly true because they have something called a CFD, a contract for difference. That means they get guaranteed a set price per kilowatt hour or megawatt hour of electricity. If the price is higher than that, so let's say they get a CFD of £50 per megawatt hour, and the price, because of the gas rate, is £100 per megawatt hour. That extra £50 isn't just pure profit for those generators. That goes into something called the LCCC, the Low Carbon Contracts Company. This is a government-run company that manages the contracts for difference. They take that money and invest it, and then if the price were to drop below the price that the generators were guaranteed, they would then use that money to supplement it. So the renewable generators aren't getting really any benefit from the price being high because of gas. Now remember, everything I've just described is at the wholesale level. The price that you and I pay as domestic consumers is different from that. So the question is if they break this link, if renewables can be sold into the market at the price they're bidded by the generator, how much will we save? Well, this is where all the headlines in the papers start to fall apart. Government modelling through the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero and their REMA analysis that we talked about earlier estimates that it would save the average consumer between £20 and £45 per year. Now, there are more optimistic models out there. Aurora Energy Research, their model says somewhere between £50 and £100 a year. So it's also worth noting at this point that these modelled scenarios are not guarantees. The amount that we save could be a lot less. It might be more. We'd love to be optimistic and say it will be more, but it could also be nothing. Outcomes really depend on how the market is redesigned, and that's something that the government isn't committing to at the moment. In fact, they're not even committing to do anything. All they're committing to is to look at it. Now, let's be fair, there are benefits. If this works as intended, it would mean we're less exposed as a country to global gas price shocks. You know, the kind of spikes that we saw in 2022 with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and that we've seen in the last couple of weeks with the President of the United States' vanity war in the Middle East. Now, it should also make electricity prices a bit more stable, because more of your power comes from generators on fixed price contracts rather than volatile wholesale markets. And in theory, it allows cheap renewables like wind and solar to actually show up as the cheapest power in the system and ultimately drag the price down rather than have gas drag the price up. But here's the key point. This is about stability, not savings. It's about stabilizing the energy markets and not leaving us exposed to global crisis, not really big savings. Now, there are also cons to this as well, and these don't get talked about quite as often. First of all, the savings, as we've talked about, are quite small. Even in the best case, you're not looking at a dramatic drop in your bill. You're looking at modest reductions, which by the time we add on inflation over the number of years, will probably get eaten up. So you're probably not going to see a noticeable month-to-month drop. Second of all, this is complicated. We're effectively redesigning how the entire electricity market works. And with that come risks and unintended consequences. There could be pricing distortions, and I can guarantee you if somebody finds a loophole or a hiccup in the system, they could easily be exploited. And like with any big change, there is the real chance that this could increase costs in the long run. If investors see more uncertainty or rule changes, or they think that sometime in the future the UK government is just going to pull the carpet from underneath them and change all the rules, they'll demand higher returns. They will look at the costs and ultimately say, We're not willing to take the risk, therefore that risk has to be passed on to the consumer, otherwise we're not going to invest. And more importantly, none of this, nothing that is proposed here, does anything about your standing charges. Now, your energy bill isn't just about the price of electricity, and this is where the whole conversation often goes off track. A big chunk of what you pay has nothing to do with the wholesale electricity price at all. It's made up of network costs to move electricity around the country, policy costs set by the government, and those ever-increasing standing charges that you pay for just being connected to the network. So even if this reform works perfectly, it only touches one part of the bill, and not even the biggest part for many households. Now let's take a moment and talk about timelines, because this is the part people really need to understand, because the timing here matters more than anything. Right now, in early 2026, we're still in the we're looking at it phase. Consultations, proposals, a lot of talking, a lot of posturing by the energy minister, going on Sunday morning politics and talking about what we're going to do. There has been no commitment to do anything at this point. Now, if things move forward quickly, which is not a phrase you hear often in government, you might start to see the first changes about this time next year, early 2027, mainly around how existing renewable projects are being paid. Now, this isn't going to have an immediate impact on your bills, but these kind of changes, as they start to roll, could actually have a meaningful impact on your bill, again, £50 to £100 a year by the end of the decade. 2028, 2029, if we're lucky, but more likely 2030 and beyond. So if you're expecting cheaper bills anytime soon, I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed. Now let's take a moment for a reality check here and be honest about what this really is. This is a long-term structural change to how the electricity markets work in the UK. It's about redesigning the system for the future with more renewables, more electrification, and less reliance on gas. It's not a quick fix. It's not a policy designed to suddenly slash your energy bills. And the likelihood is we're probably not going to see any impact of it for probably the next 5 years. So instead of focusing on what might happen in a few years' time, it's worth looking about what actually works today. Right now, people are already cutting their energy bills using things like smart tariffs, shifting usage to off-peak periods, and combining that with solar and battery storage. Those aren't theoretical, they're not modeled, they're not something that might happen in the future. They can deliver savings to your bills today. So when we put this side by side with what the government's proposing, on one hand, you've got the government plan that might save you £30 to £50 a year, take years to implement, and still has a lot of uncertainty around it. And on the other hand, you've got solar, batteries, and smart tariffs, things that can save you literally hundreds of pounds a year that are available right now. And if you are on the fence about solar and batteries, let me put it in one simple statement for you. In the vast majority of cases, people who install solar and batteries can save more in a single month than this policy change may save you a year at some point in the future. So breaking the gas link is something that we need to do. As a country, we need to be less reliant upon gas. And it might shave a few pounds off your bill over a period of time. It might make the system a bit fairer and a bit more stable. But it's not going to transform your energy costs, and it's not going to give you any more control. If you want to reduce your bills in a meaningful way, the biggest gains are never coming from policy. They're coming from what you choose to do in your own home. You have to take control of it yourself. Now, this is definitely something to keep an eye on because it will shape how our energy system works in the future. But it's not something to wait on. Because by the time any meaningful savings have been delivered, you could already have made those savings yourself many times over. The opportunity is here now. You've just got to be willing to take it. That's it for this week's video. I hope you found this interesting. If you do have questions, please do post them in the comments below. I'd love to know what you think. Is this something you think will have a meaningful change on your energy bills, or do you think this is basically a nothing burger from the government? With that, it just remains for me to say thank you for clicking on this video. I hope you found it interesting, and if I'm lucky, I'll see you back here real soon for another video. Take care. Bye-bye.